All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're cracking open a really controversial piece of publishing history from back in 1981. It's a book that wasn't a warning, it was positioned as a guide, and it was called The Cocaine Handbook. The book kicks off its preface with this very line. It's this really cryptic statement that kind of perfectly sets the stage for the strange, contradictory, and let's be honest, dangerous world we're about to dive into.
I mean, can you imagine walking into a bookstore today and finding a literal manual for an illegal substance, complete with chemical diagrams, tips on testing for quality, the whole shebang? That's what this was. It was like part chemistry textbook, part market report, and part weird philosophical essay.
But see, this book wasn't just about the drug itself. It was trying to peel back the curtain on the entire culture, the chemistry, and the business of cocaine, right at the absolute peak of its popularity. So what on earth did it claim to teach people?
Our journey, just like the one in the handbook, doesn't start where you'd think, not in some lab or on a city street. No, it starts high up in the mountains of South America with a plant the book calls Mama Coca, the source of it all.
Okay, so one of the first things the book does, and this is super important, is make a critical distinction. On one hand, you've got the coca leaf. The book calls it the divine plant, and it's been chewed for thousands of years by people in the Andes for energy, for medicine, for rituals. But on the other hand, you have cocaine, a single refined chemical pulled out of that leaf. The book's whole argument starts here. These are two totally different things.
And for a while there, the Western world didn't see a problem with it either. According to the handbook, coca and cocaine weren't always hiding in the shadows. They were totally mainstream. You had stuff like Vin Mariani, a coca leaf wine that was a huge hit in Europe. It even got a gold medal from Pope Leo XIII. And yes, of course, the original 1886 formula for Coca-Cola was sold as a brain tonic because it had extracts from the coca leaf.
All right, so after that little history lesson, the book pivots hard into chemistry. It tries to demystify the secret process of turning a simple plant into a white powder. It takes us right into the hidden world of the illegal chemists, the so-called cooks.
So first up, we've got to talk about something called alkaloids. Really, they're just naturally occurring chemicals you find in plants. And the book makes a huge point of this. Cocaine is only one of at least 14 different alkaloids in the coca leaf. This is so important because it means the stuff made illegally is almost never pure. It's actually a cocktail of all these related chemicals.
And check this out. This shows you just how incredibly fragile the cocaine molecule is. If the chemical conditions are wrong, if it's too acidic or too basic, the molecule literally falls apart into 3 separate pieces. For the amateur cooks using crude methods in the jungle, this chemical instability is a massive, massive problem. And this is where you see the huge difference between a makeshift kitchen process and a real pharmaceutical lab. The illicit cook, as one source told the author, just needs 3 buckets and 2 sheets. His goal is just to rip out whatever cocaine is already there in the leaves, fast. But the pharmaceutical process? It's way more advanced. It actually converts all those other related alkaloids into pure cocaine. The result is a much higher yield and way, way higher purity. Okay, we've covered the chemistry. Now the handbook lays out the money trail. That long and dangerous journey the product takes from a tiny farm in the Andes all the way to a consumer thousands of miles away. The book lays out this whole complex pyramid, right? It all starts at the bottom with thousands of individual farmers who make this crude stuff called coca paste. Then guides collect the paste, it gets sold to buyers, moved through different labs, first to make a base, then to make the final crystal. It has to pass through smugglers and big-time wholesalers before it even gets anywhere near a street-level dealer. And here's the thing, at every single step on that ladder, something happens. The product gets stepped on or diluted with other stuff. The handbook runs the numbers and comes up with this just staggering calculation. A single 300-kilo shipment, by the time it gets cut and recut all the way down the line, turns into 2.5 million individual 1-gram units sold on the street. And this is what that looks like visually. According to the book's analysis from that time, the final product that actually reached the end user was on average only about 12% actual cocaine. So what about the other 88%? Well, that's a mix of all those other coca alkaloids, leftover processing chemicals, and whatever else was added to it along the way. Now, you'd probably think a so-called handbook might, gloss over the bad stuff, right?
Nope. This book dedicates a whole chapter to what it calls the high cost of getting high, and it gets into the severe consequences of using the drug. And it is brutally direct about the health risks. We're talking severe damage to your nose, including ulcers that can literally eat a hole right through your septum. It warns about massive stress on your heart and your whole cardiovascular system, plus a ton of psychological effects, everything from anxiety and paranoia to a very high potential for psychological dependency. And then, of course, there's the law. The handbook is filled with pages of charts just like this one, spelling out the incredibly harsh and wildly different legal penalties from state to state. In one place, just having it could land you 3 years in prison, and another, selling it could mean 30. The book makes it crystal clear that the risk of losing your freedom is a very real part of the cost. And all of this brings us to what is, honestly, the most bizarre and contradictory part of the whole book. Its very strange definition of what it means to be a connoisseur. It puts forth this wild idea that a true connoisseur isn't the person who uses the most, but someone who approaches it with this almost spiritual level of discipline. It literally frames connoisseurship as a yoga of self-control, knowledge, and personal responsibility. It's a pretty wild take.
And this, right here, this is the absolute heart of the paradox. In a book that has just explained in minute detail how to test, purify, and understand cocaine, the introduction, written by a Dr. Michael Aldrich, says that the ultimate sign of mastery isn't using it, it's having the willpower to say no.
But if you think that's a contradiction, it gets even weirder. In the foreword to the revised edition of the book, that same author is even more blunt. He writes that because of all the increasing dangers, if you believe in the intelligent use of drugs, now is the time to get off cocaine. So the handbook essentially concludes by advising its readers to completely reject the very thing it's about.
So, where does that leave us? With a book that hands over all this dangerous knowledge, while at the same time preaching abstinence and self-control? It's just a fascinating and pretty troubling artifact from a totally different time. Was it a genuine, if maybe completely misguided attempt at consumer protection and harm reduction? Or was it just a dangerous fantasy that made a destructive trade seem glamorous? That right there is the unresolved question the Cocaine Handbook leaves us with.